I'm Andy Howard from RemoteTechPeople, and joining us today is Ben May from the Code Company. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, Andy.
Thanks for joining us today. Now, Ben, the Code Company is a leading technical WordPress agency, one of only a handful, I think, of WordPress VIP agencies in this region. Can you tell us a bit more about what the Code Company does?
Sure. So we started a long time ago, back in the days of early WordPress. And over the years, we've grown into a specialist in the media and publishing space, building publishing platforms powered by WordPress. So we work with media, publishing, content companies, all different shapes and sizes. And basically, we use WordPress as a big piece of that as at the core of the technology stack.
So publishing specialists, and you've said publishers of all different shapes and sizes. Could you give me some examples of the types of publishers that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, what's I guess really interesting about our work is, for something that feels incredibly siloed and niche, the amount of range of different people we work with on a week-to-week basis. So, whether we're looking at somebody who like a pedestrian group that talks to, a younger youth audience in the Australian market, to hercampus.com, which is a publication for girls going through college in the United States and is, user-generated content and things like this, through to, more enterprise or corporate applications where, we're seeing the world of marketing and content kind of fusing a lot more, and content being a play in part of that. So, we're doing stuff for upstarts that are sort of trying to punch bigger companies that are trying to catch up with what more agile and smaller companies are working with. And yeah, there's a ton of variation in what we're doing, but all at the end of it, it's all content that we're working with at the back end.
So it's all publishing. It just takes many different forms. And where are your clients based? You've mentioned the pedestrian group who you work with locally. I understand you also work with Nine, Mumbrella, some other large Australian publishers. Where are your clients based? Is it mostly in Australia? Do you have some overseas clients as well?
Yeah, we started, obviously being an Australian firm, started here, and a lot of our work has come out of Sydney and Melbourne as well. So, down in Melbourne, we worked with Crikey and Private Media and those people down there. We've also worked a lot with Arts Hub and Games Hub and that group as well, and they're down in Melbourne. So we've got a lot of Australian-based clients. But over the years, one of the things that we've found, which I think is probably we've proven ourselves wrong a little bit, but one of the things we found was, we were hitting a ceiling in Australia of the kinds of clients we wanted to work with, and just the sheer scale that the US represents for us. So we started expanding more into the US market and working with publishers over there. A small publication in the state of California has still got a sample size twice the size of the entire Australian population. So, we've grown over there. I think last time I looked about a year ago, we were sitting at about a third of our work coming from the US, and that's continuing to increase every day. We've started to scale a small team over there and sort of calibrating constantly what our footprint will look like as we take on that market, as well as continuing to grow in the Australian market. And I think the thing we didn't realize is, there's a lot of known clients to go after. And again, what I love about this industry is the unknown ones that come out of nowhere that are incredibly successful, healthy businesses that the mainstream or just regular, people like you and me would never come across. But, there's a community for, professional coin valuers or something like that, and have a huge market and also looking for help. So, yeah, there's plenty of work to go around.
I love that. Is that what you mean when you say you've maybe proven yourselves wrong a little bit? Do you mean you've been taken by surprise somewhat at just the scale of publishers out there in the world that need the sort of help that the Code Company provides?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the oversimplistic things we thought through was, we're already working with so many of Australia's largest media company or independent companies. So we sort of sit in the mid space. We're not working necessarily with the highest, largest brands. We're a certain size and we sort of have a sweet spot. And we're also working with people who have sort of grown a bit and can afford to engage that, expertise in a sort of scaling fashion. And yeah, I guess we probably thought at one point, we've outgrown Australia. We need to move overseas. But both are true. We're both growing in the US and still continuing to have stuff that we never would have thought come out in Australia as well. So that keeps it exciting.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you've set up a team in the US. Can you talk me through where the Code Company staff are based?
Yeah, so in Australia, which is 80% of our team, we've got people all up and down the East Coast, as probably most of the population of Australia is really. So from Sydney to, I think we're probably the highest, so Hervey Bay. We did have some people up in Cairns, but yeah, up and down the coast, chunk in the Sunshine Coast, chunk in Brisbane, and a couple in Sydney as well. So our team's sort of spread up and down there. In terms of the US, we sort of worked backwards from order of need. So the most important role we wanted to have first was project management and kind of that point of contact for current work. From there, we then sort of went through the next most important thing is, from a sales, business development, relationship perspective, someone who's available a bit more than just what I am, getting up early, which is fortunate that I'm an early person, so I don't mind doing that, but that's not a long-term strategy. So the second hire has been more in that sales, account management, growth sort of umbrella, and then our third one will be something in technology, I guess. So a lead developer to have sort of that skeleton crew over there to represent us and the rest of the team that's back here doing the majority of the day-to-day.
So you have a distributed team across multiple countries. You have a distributed client base across multiple countries. Can you talk me through how you manage the collaboration both internally amongst the team and then also externally? How do you collaborate with clients that are based all over the place?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've done fairly well is pick what regions as well we want to work in and not sort of just say we'll work with anyone everywhere. Anyone in Australia will know that you can't work with both someone in Europe and the US on the same day. It's a very long a very long time span to try and do both. So, we've resisted and sort of pushed back when we've had, people we want to work with in Europe or UK or wherever, or anywhere on that side of the planet, because it just doesn't work that we can do early, middle, and late shifts. So one thing was, definitely restrict to sort of North America and Australia, our two sort of main time zones we work with. We haven't wanted to build a full round-the-clock team and things like that. That's definitely, and I know people who do, it's definitely possible, but it's a whole different kettle of fish. In terms of like collaboration, I think that's one of the hardest things to manage is, sort of replicating that whiteboard experience in a room and sort of working through ideas and brainstorming and things like that. And sometimes we'll try and do that if the opportunity arises that the team is close enough or the client's available to do it. We'll sometimes we'll just physically all jump on a plane and go do a few days in a workshop. Great for relationship building, great for, just getting through a ton of stuff quickly. But also always doesn't work if we've got a team in Australia and you're in lockdown and can't get to the US. You have to work through different technology that will allow you to do the job. So, we've worked with a lot of different things, and when you start early on, you go through the decision paralysis of so many different tools that are out there, and the irony lost on how much time wasted on trying to find productivity apps and things to optimize productivity and perpetually looking and wasting time. So, we've tried to keep the suite of tools we use to a minimum. We can always try and experiment and the market changes. If we're looking at things like workshops and sort of discovery sessions and sort of those early days in an engagement, tools like Miro have been really good where, you can sort of either screen share or everyone's looking at the same thing and work through, post-it noting and just sort of scribbling things down, uploading bits of documents and notes and stuff like that. And really to have sort of that loose, unstructured workspace to begin with, because sometimes anyone in any creative industry, when you start pulling into thread, you don't know which way that thread's going to go. So having it all go into a Google Doc, in A4 pages doesn't necessarily make sense sometimes, just the way the information may present itself.
Sure. And when you're using a tool like Miro to recreate that in-person whiteboard experience, how do you facilitate these workshops? Are you really taking that offline practice, so the same sort of methodology and approach that you'd use if the team's jumping on a plane and going to the US and running this in person? Are you taking that same sort of facilitation and approach and literally just applying that online through tools like Miro?
Yeah, I think that the certain things you need to navigate that are a bit more different, virtually versus physically. Sometimes it's a matter of calling out, sort of ground rules around these sort of sessions and saying, look, turn Slack off, turn mobile devices off, things like that. If we're here to do this, it's going to be as good as the time you put into it. And if you're sort of just treating this like another Zoom session and multitasking or answering a question on Slack and out of the question, then it's going to result the same. Being digital, it does allow you to get away with those kinds of things. If you were sitting in a room together, it'd be a lot more noticeable if you were on Slack or replying to a few emails in the middle of a workshop. So, understanding that and sort of just having that honest conversation, but also then being realistic about structuring that. Thinking that you can do 4 hours on Zoom is probably unrealistic and going to result in people drifting off or getting distracted. So, we constantly playing around with, do we do more short bursts of sessions? Do a session, we'll go away, work on it, collaborate for an hour, come back, do another session, sort of break the day up, break the sort of screen fatigue up as well, than sort of sitting there doing that.
Is there any sort of format that you've uncovered there that works best for you so far? Like, say, doing an hour or so in this collaborative whiteboarding environment with your client and then breaking off as a team for an hour or maybe two and then coming back and regrouping with the client and pushing it along further? Is that sort of rhythm working for you, or is there any other approach that seems to work well remotely?
I think that's been the best blend of different things we've tried, is sort of that 2 to 3 sessions a day, more broken up, rather than the sort of monolithic ones where people will just be tuning out by the end of it, or just everyone looks like they just need to go sit in the sun to just wake up and come back to life again. So yeah, I think it's knowing that what we can do online is very different to sitting in a room. What might take 2 days what might take 2 days in an office may take a week online, and just having the permission that that's going to happen. And then, if we just be honest and say, look, we're going to have a few hours, people can go do whatever they need to, go do Slack, go do email, things like that. And then we're going to come back and, having more bursts of guaranteed time rather than having unrealistic expectations that ultimately just let everyone down. So,
got it. And so workshops are one of those things where it sounds like sometimes they can take more time remotely than in person for all of these reasons. Is there anything from a client management or even a project production point of view that you've found where working remotely actually speeds things up rather than slows things down?
I think in terms of the ability to make things go faster remotely is definitely that people can work at different times, different paces. People have more autonomy than sort of, I guess, the traditional everyone does the same 9 to 5 and things like that. I guess Slack allows a developer or any resource to really shut themselves off to the world and actually be head down and have some work done. So in terms of a collaboration, the ability to sort of tap someone on the shoulder or pick up on visual cues or whatever sort of environmental cues there may be in those early days, once you start to get a bit of a rhythm, understand a project, understand a goal or a client or whatever else, the ability to sort of move at your own speed and just sort of be heads down and sort of control and manage your disruptions. If you're fortunate enough to be at home and have your own office or whatever else, once you turn Slack off and turn your emails off, you're kind of in a bubble. You can go and work as much as you want. So you've got anywhere between there and pure distraction to manage. your own work and output for anything.
And in a productivity sense, is there anything that you've found has worked for the code company's staff or for you personally, just to maintain this high velocity, high productivity workday?
I think especially for, businesses and because we work with businesses that are scaling, things like chaos come naturally to that arena. We've been working with some people who refer to digital agencies as no-cos, which is a naturally occurring chaotic organization. And that's purely by the nature of the work that we do, that it is naturally occurring chaos. So it's our job to sort of manage and embrace the chaos, because at the end of the day, people don't come to us when everything's just perfect. There's a problem, or they need something done rapidly, or they're thinking it through at the same time. You've worked in agencies, you know all about it. So, part of that I've always thought, especially when we look at some of our more, chaotic clients, and chaotic just in the fact there's a lot of things going on, is having 1,000 kilometers between, the business and actually someone who needs to get work done is actually a really great firewall sometimes, and being able to sort of restrict communications, because I've watched firsthand businesses that do have internal resources as well as work with us. Those internal resources are getting dragged into 60 different meetings. They're getting 5-minute disruptions in the hallway. The ability, especially for us being technical and primarily development, there's charts and stats around you see that that 5-minute interruption can result in 90 minutes of lost productivity by the time you get back into that flow state, things like that. So for us in development, having that firewall, being able to say, right, I'm working on something for the next 4 hours, turning off my notifications and just getting on with it, is probably the biggest thing. And it's often a benefit for us to say, look, your internal resources are having a efficiency problem because, no one's safeguarding their time from the rest of the team. They're just getting, pulled out in every direction possible.
It is a beautiful thing about remote work, just the space that pure distance can create. That level of isolation and being cut off from some of that inherent chaos that can consume the day-to-day if you're right there on the ground in the firing line. It's nice to have that protection. And are there any other, I guess, habits or tips that you've formed or the team has developed to just stay on track when working remotely? I mean, you're the managing director of the code company. You've got staff in multiple countries. Is there any shares from you just on how you manage to run a distributed workforce and maintain that visibility and help the whole operation run productively?
Yeah, I think any business, and I mean, we've always been remote in the sense we were never close to our clients. Like, I'm in a regional area. None of our clients are in this area, let alone in this state, for the last, 5 to 10 years anyway. So as you have sort of, I guess, checks and balances of running the business, those checks and balances sort of have to be, I guess, have a certain amount of trust built into them. A lot of people always, when you talk to agency owners, 4 or 5 years ago, mind would explode when you talk about remote as this foreign concept. And, you'd get questions like, well, how do you know anyone's doing any work and this sort of stuff, which, is a very oversimplistic question to ask. But in reality, if work's not getting done, if clients are complaining that work hasn't been delivered, that's when you're going to know the work's not being done. So it's been an interesting, I guess, starting point that's helped a lot of people think about the future of work in that whole conversation, which is a whole conversation in itself of, does 40 hours a week at a desk mean that you're working? Or if, you can get something that was, meant to be 10 hours done in an hour, as the value's been created and things like that. But that's a whole different discussion. In terms of those checks and balances, I think it has to be built on trust and good faith that people are working on, working what they're doing. Obviously, again, we work in software. We can see things like code being committed, even, work in progress. Leveraging agile and the most important parts for us around, transparency and openness. We have stand-ups with our internal team, but also with our clients. So our clients will see what we're working on today. If they knew how to, they could look in GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever the work is. But also just, it's essentially that feeling of like we're in the same office together. You've engaged us for the next 6 months to work side by side building something. we're not going to go off, that old agency model of a PM's going to take all the notes, they're going to copy that, send it to a developer. No one's ever going to talk to each other and hope for the best. Everyone's in the same room together. So if you're not working, then that's going to come out pretty quickly and pretty obviously. But it's also just a better way to work and sort of follows our whole open source, open transparency ethos about everything when we're working together.
Great share. And how have you managed to foster the culture of the Code Company remotely? You've been distributed since day one. I feel like you've been in business for over a decade by this point. How have you managed to foster and grow this culture in a remote first environment?
Yeah, I think in the earliest days, like the first couple of employees, we were all in the same office, like in those really early days. And I guess we were working remotely with our clients because we weren't going in for face-to-face meetings and we weren't sort of popping in. So we were sort of, the agency was remote, but we were face-to-face. I think anything in this world is finding sort of people who share similar values and understand why we're going a certain direction and, sort of have been able to have, I guess, that core team, the old guard of the business that was there in the early days that has been able to sort of help foster that and grow that as we've brought other people in. A lot of people have come in. I think they've all got different definitions of what sort of success from this looks like, whether it's, going surfing at lunch or being able to walk the kids to school in the morning versus doing working the days or the hours or whatever else that sort of works around their life. So I think we've been pretty good at finding people along the way who buy into that and see, I don't want to have to drive 3 hours a day in and out of the office or whatever else, and the trade-offs that affords. So I don't think we've had too many issues along the way really with people buying that sort of dream. And I think part of that is sort of seeing it being lived out by the rest of our team. We use things like in Slack, a whereabouts channel where people will sort of check in the morning if they're off to do the school run or off for 2 hours. It's not a business of like 25 individual contractors who are all siloed away from each other. It's sort of all very collaborative, open forum. So, when you see, me going out for an hour or someone else in sort of the management team off to pick their kids up or, and come back for an hour at night to finish off for the day, you understand like that culture is very open and transparent and it's not sort of one set of rules for some or others. And there's no resentment, I would hope, of people, well, I'm here working, I'm stuck here, I can't leave, but, so-and-so is going to the gym, or whatever else, because everyone's got that flexibility. And ultimately, if they can be accountable to themselves and make it work, then who are we to micromanage their day and sit over their shoulder that they're working 9 to 5?
Yeah, it sounds like everyone at the Code Company feels like they have the permission of flexibility, and that sort of permission and behavior and culture is top down, and you're sharing this through your whereabouts channel in Slack. Feels like a really nice way to make it very clear and transparent that flexibility is allowed here, and it's not just allowed, but it's embraced.
Yeah, if you play it back the other way around, as long as you're attending meetings that are being scheduled, if you've got a meeting with a client and you're showing up to that, the work that's getting assigned for a day or a week or a month is getting delivered. Doesn't matter if you're doing that on middle of the night or weekends or whatever else. All of that is kind of arbitrary. So you've got that flexibility. If you want to take a Friday afternoon off because you're just not feeling it and you'd rather go and watch TV, then do that. And if you want to catch up the next day or catch up the next week, as long as those things are being managed, then as long as people have a bit of autonomy and accountability, then they're free agents, I guess, in that sense, which I think is a pretty obvious thing in hindsight when you look back at the work's getting done. What benefit does it mean to say you have to push through a migraine and work all afternoon because we need to get the work done or whatever else?
And how often do all of you meet up in the same place, or how regularly are team members in the same room together?
So we've still got a couple of little pods that will probably catch up occasionally, and that's people who are geographically close. Before COVID, it was probably a bit of a different thing. The last year or two has been a bit of a logistical problem trying to organize things, but we've tried to do sort of two main sort of catch-ups a year where everyone's in the same room, and whether that's all, picking the most central capital city and everyone shows up there for 2 or 3 days to just, even sometimes just to co-work. Sometimes we sort of tried to do a mid-year co-working session, just, a few days of going to lunch and that sort of stuff, as well as little projects and things like that. And then sort of towards the end of the year, sort of what we called like workshops where, people are showing what they've been doing or sort of, latest technology or software or, whatever that may be, and just sort of using those as a few days to sit back and share and reflect on things that have worked and not.
Nice. Good habit. Ben, just in closing, any thoughts from you around the future of work and potentially how the code company might look to shift the way you're working remotely over the next year or so?
Yeah, I think a lot of good stuff's happening in that space and sort of decoupling work from, the industrial revolution kind of concept of what work is, and how we do that. People who are moving to 4-day week, but just still doing their 37 and a half hours over 4 days versus 5 days, and sort of having that flexibility. As a professional services firm, cutting 20% of your hours, so it just means cutting 20% of your billable hours and revenue. But there's lots of different ways coming into sort of more commonly accepted by clients that aren't sort of scaring them off. Obviously, as an agency, if you just say, we're just a functioning chaos business where everyone does whatever they want, it doesn't feel very stable and dependable. And that's something that if you're providing a vital service, you want to definitely emulate, that you are a dependable partner to work with for the time to come. But I think the confluence of COVID has been a level set for a lot of businesses who have realized a lot more can be done hybrid or fully remote. I think hybrid's a great mix of that, especially if businesses are doing that right for the right reasons, but also what can be done fully remote, realizing that, actually we don't need to work with someone who's down the street. That doesn't actually that doesn't create any less risk in a project or an engagement. And that, the saying I heard a while ago, which has stuck with me when I explain to people why we go down this path of remote, is talent is distributed, opportunity is not. So, 15 years ago, if you were a brilliant software developer, you had to move to Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne to be employed and be paid sort of what you were worth. If you lived in a small regional town, middle of New South Wales, there's not a lot of high-end software engineering jobs. So businesses that can capitalize on the fact that talent is everywhere. There's not just talent in major cities. Talent exists everywhere. That's where you're going to be able to, take advantage of the other problem we have at the moment, which is workforce shortages and finding suitably qualified people. And if we're all looking in the same places, then we're going to drain those wells. But if we're starting to look outside that, that's where more opportunity will lay for sure.
Absolutely. Ben, that's been a very insightful discussion. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure. Great to chat.